you chatted to a young guy about, you kind of used a solipsist approach, which was about evolution. Can you prove anything is true?
No, that's a fact.
Do you remember that one? I think you were wearing a purple outfit. I don't know if you were just testing that or whether that was actually your belief.
No. Let's have that discussion now, just so I can refresh as well. There was a few different points in our discussion. The few different points mentioned, a few different arguments mentioned in that discussion. Just can we move down a bit? It's a bit noisy. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So the basic question that obviously that was based on the evolutionary thing, but the basic question I ask atheists, so I'm asking myself right now, is you're recording, right? Just so
yes, yeah.
Cool. So because I don't want to keep coming close.
Stay there. Then at least I get it up.
That's fine.
And I'll put it up in its entirety, no editing.
No problem. Yeah. Okay. So the question I ask atheists is, on atheism or naturalism, right? And I don't want to assume your position. So are you an atheist or a naturalist?
Yes.
What is your
atheist? Yeah.
You're an atheist, okay? So do you ascribe to naturalism as well by extension, or just?
Yes, to a point. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't say it's the be all and end all, but it seems to be a good explanation. Yes.
Okay.
I'm not an absolutist.
Okay.
I also don't say God absolutely does not exist.
Okay.
So.
Well, you seem like a rational individual as well, right?
Hopefully, reasonably so.
At least you know your definitions and your terms, according to the book, right? But anyway, the point I'm making, or the question I ask atheists is, on your worldview, how do you account for your rational faculties, your truth-bearing rational faculties?
How do you account for it?
Yeah.
I guess the only naturalistic explanation will be evolution, as far as I'm aware.
Okay, there's a problem. There's a problem with that. The issue is, whenever I speak to atheists about this, they jump to a scientific explanation. But there's almost a fundamental problem here, which is that when we're talking about human rationality, we're talking about one of the axioms of the scientific method itself. Right?
Which one?
Which is that we are human and we're rational, and we have the ability to attain truth and distinguish between truth and falsehood. Okay?
To a point, yes.
No, well, it is an axiom, because if you don't have that, you can't really do science.
Yeah. What you mean? I thought you meant about humans in general, because not every human can do that. But the axiom I agree with. So you're talking about the laws of logic.
No. I don't want to conflate things. What I'm talking about is our ability, our rational faculties, which allow us to distinguish between truth and falsehood, allow us to do things like science and engage in philosophy and things like this. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about. And I'm asking, how do you, on your worldview, foundationally account for your rational faculties, your truth-bearing rational faculties?
So as I say to you, the best explanation that I have without going into it in depth is through evolution. How else would I do that?
No, what you're doing is it's like a dog chasing his own tail, basically, right? Pardon me for the analogy. But what you're doing basically is you're using a method that we use as human beings, which has assumptions, one assumption being that we're rational. So you're using the method that assumes we're rational, and then you're using it to try and validate rationality. That's circular. You can't do that.
It's not circular.
Yes, it is.
No.
Of course it is.
Well, I'm basing it on the laws of logic, which are self-attesting. Would you agree or not?
Foundational, axiomatic, whatever you want to call them.
Yes, correct. Do you agree with that?
Yes. Okay. But that's what I'm asking you. That your rational faculties, how do you, on your worldview, which is atheism, by extension naturalism, right?
Yes.
Mine is Islam, and theism by extension.
Yes.
How do you, in your worldview, account for rationality in the first place, right? Before we delve into a method which requires an axiom, which is rationality, right? On your worldview, on atheism, on naturalism, which is the idea everything is a result of natural causes. Correct me if I'm wrong. Everything that in existence is physical. It's a result of physical processes. There is no mind or intelligence or awareness behind all of this.
I'm not absolutely saying that. There could be, but I just don't see any justification for that.
Okay, no, but I want to know what your position is, because I don't want to be talking to it in general. It doesn't make sense us having a discussion.
So in general, my position is naturalism.
Okay, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong again, which is everything is a result of physical processes. There is no mind, there is no awareness, there is no intelligence.
You mean external mind to our own?
Well, okay, let me put it this way. Let me try using my words correctly. There is nothing except physical processes which over millions of years or billions of years have resulted in everything we see around us in the physical world.
Okay, fair enough.
Is that fair enough?
That's fine.
And according to this foundation, this worldview, and what it assumes, that being the case, what I've just discussed, then how do you account for ordered rational faculties which lead to truth? Something doesn't add up there for me, because what you're saying essentially is you have blind random physical processes taking place without any intention or intentionality or thinking or life behind them, and somehow they resulted in rational ordered thought which makes sense of the world around us. How do you make that jump? That's what I'm interested in.
When you say how to make the jump, and I said to you the evolutionary process,
Yes.
from lower thinking to better thinking.
What was your name, by the way?
Rob. Yours?
Imran, sorry.
Imran, right.
We'll discuss the evolutionary explanation. I don't mind entertaining it.
Okay, but you keep asking me the foundation.
No, sure. But you're not understanding a crucial point I'm making.
Go ahead.
I'll engage you on that level because I've studied that on an academic level, the evolutionary explanation for human rationality and consciousness. We'll discuss that. But there's a more fundamental point, and that's this: that before we give a scientific explanation, it makes no sense in giving one because the foundations and axioms of science, one being that we need to accept that we're rational and we have truth-bearing rational faculties. So if that's an assumption of science and you need that to do science, then what sense is there in a circular way, then using science to justify or validate that? The discussion firstly is at a more foundational level, which is worldviews. What best accounts for these truth-bearing rational faculties? Atheism or naturalism or Islam? That's the main question here. We'll discuss the
Okay, so you give me yours because then I can understand better where you're coming from. So
I'll give
explain yours.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll give the Islamic one's very simple.
Cool.
And the beautiful thing about the Islamic explanation is we can give you the how and the why.
Go ahead.
Because according to the Islamic perspective, God is the creator, He's all powerful, and He created our rational minds. It's easy for Him. For example, in the Quran, He says, be and it is. Kun fayakun.
Yes.
Right? Be and it is. It's that simple. God creates. So He created our rational minds. Number two, the why. Well, God gave us rational minds so we can use our rational faculties to observe the physical reality around us, which is a sign which points back towards Him. So when we observe the physical world and we see the amazing nature of the world around us, from something as simple as a DNA molecule to something as complex as the laws that govern this universe, these are all signs that point back towards the Creator. And in turn, we worship Him, we turn back to Him, we say, we understand that that's God and this is us, right? That's the Islamic understanding, is the how and the why. It's a very comprehensive answer. But on the other hand, on naturalism, you don't have an answer. You have, if anything...
And even if I didn't, let's say, so what? Does that mean that you can then insert yours to say that's the only option?
Okay, what you said is very interesting. Even if I didn't, so what? Well, there's loads...
When I say, sorry,
Yes.
when I say it didn't, we don't yet know. Let's assume that we don't yet know the answer.
See, this thing, let's not have a discussion based on the loose assumptions. I'm discussing you as your position, right? So what is your position right now? Do you, from your worldview, understand this reality or don't you? That's the question.
As far as I can understand,
right now you just
I
said,
understand this reality.
Because right now you said, even if my worldview, naturalism, can't account for human rationality or truth-bearing faculties, so what? Well, there's huge implications. One being, you having a discussion with me right now is pointless because you can't account for your...
Right.
You don't know, right? From your point of view, you don't know, right? On the other hand, it makes my case because what I'm trying to do here is give you da'wah, which is an invitation to the Islamic worldview, is to ask you to come and observe this reality because it has a very comprehensive way of understanding reality, including rationality. So so there are some implications there, right?
Yes.
So now, if you want to carry on this discussion, now I'm not saying you're not rational. On my worldview, I can account for your rationality for you even, right? But I don't want to do that.
Good.
I want to know your worldview, how according to naturalism or atheism you account for human rational faculties, truth-bearing faculties. Before we indulge in the scientific explanations, which we'll discuss anyway. I'll grant you that in a bit. But for now,
why is the evolutionary process unsatisfactory to you?
No, it's not. Well, it is to me, but I'll explain that to you. Like I said, we will discuss that. But firstly, you have to discuss it from a foundational level, which is on your worldview, which is naturalism, atheism. How do you account for these rational faculties? How do you account for this very thing, which is an axiom of the scientific method itself?
Which I've said to you, I account for that through evolution, and you are saying that's not good enough.
I don't think
my worldview, no, maybe you're not, or maybe you're not accepting that as my explanation.
Well, you agreed to it, so I thought you understood it, but you obviously haven't. What I'm saying is very simple. We could discuss the scientific explanation, but science is a method us human beings use, right? Do we agree to? Science is a method we use as
Correct,
human
it's
beings.
methodology.
And that method has some axioms, some assumptions
Yes.
before you do it.
They are called properly basic.
Yes. One of the assumptions is, I wouldn't go into that terminology, but we can discuss that later. One of the assumptions is that we are rational, we have truth-bearing rational faculties.
You've said that.
If you don't accept this assumption, you can't do science. It doesn't make you stupid.
I agree.
Okay?
I
Yes.
accept that assumption.
So,
yes.
then what I'm saying is this. Then it makes no sense for you to give me a scientific explanation to account for its own assumption. That's like a dog chasing his own tail. You're accepting something to do science, but then when you start doing science, you're saying, hold on a minute, I'm not accepting the very thing I accepted to do science, but now I'm going to use an explanation within science to explain that reality. It's
It
highly...
seems like it from your point of view. I don't see it that way.
Well, it is. That's what you're doing, essentially.
I don't see it that way.
Why not?
I assume my existence and I assume the laws of logic at a basic
No,
minimum.
but we're talking about human rational faculties, truth-bearing faculties.
Which are based on what?
To Do you accept that we're rational as human beings?
Yes.
Do you accept that we have the ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood as human beings?
Yes.
We eventually get to that if we use our
Yes, with a
faculties.
scientific method, etc.
Yeah. Well, that's one method, but there's a process we use to get to that. Now, that's what I'm talking about. The laws of logic, there may be an aspect of it, but they're not the whole thing. But I'm speaking about whole comprehensive reality.
No, but I'm saying to you the laws of logic are foundational.
But now you're changing this discussion. We're discussing rational faculties. Our faculties which lead us to truth.
And I'm saying to you that came about through the evolutionary process.
Okay, but for the sixth time, I understand that. That's an explanation a scientist.
That's my answer to your foundation of how do I account for the rationality.
No. Okay, let me try explaining it again. It's very simple. I'm sure most of us understand it. What I'm saying is this. As human beings, one of the things, assumptions or axioms of science is that we are rational and we have truth-bearing faculties. Yes or no? Yes, we've agreed to this. Now, what I'm saying is this. You're assuming this before you engage in science.
Correct.
Yes, okay. Now, giving a scientific explanation, therefore, for this reality, it doesn't make sense because you're assuming it already to be true before you give me a scientific explanation, right? So that's what I'm saying, the discussion's on a more foundational level. Let's look at it from worldviews first, and then we'll discuss the scientific explanations, right? That's what I'm saying. It's very simple. So, and you seem to have admitted, you said vaguely that even if I can't account for it, so what? But there's huge implications to even our discussion right now. It makes no sense. You understand the discussion.
Trying to smuggle in the presuppositional thing, and I don't accept your premises, my friend.
That's completely false. It will be a presuppositional argument if I was saying you cannot claim rationality unless you justify it. I'm not saying that. I'm starting off with the premise that it is foundational. We accept it, both of us do. But I'm saying what worldview accounts for it. There's a difference. So let's not strawman my position. That's what you're trying to do now. You're trying to strawman my position, allegate me as a presuppositionalist. I'm not.
Well, I have seen you use the presuppositional argument.
Fair enough. But I'm using a more refined version with you right now.
Fine, I can see
which
that.
Is a bit
but
more...
you are sneaking it in at the base level. That's my opinion.
Let me disprove that opinion, because if you study presuppositionalism, one of the premises of that is you begin with the premise that the individual you're discussing with can't account for his rationality unless he adopts normally a Christian worldview, because that's the arguments they're developing.
Correct, yes, I know.
Well, my premise is that we are rational, we have rational faculties, truth-bearing faculties. What best accounts for them? This is a totally different argument. It's not a presuppositional argument.
So the naturalistic explanation
of... what is from your worldview, how does your worldview, which is naturalism, account for human rationality, truth-bearing faculties?
So the development of our brain.
No. This faculty that you have, the development, we could discuss a scientific explanation for it.
Okay, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. You're going to keep insisting. I'm going to keep saying to you the foundation is evolution through the development of our brain. At one point we had common ancestor, we couldn't speak, we couldn't rationalize. In that process we got to where we are now.
Let me make it easy.
In that process we've learned.
Let me make it easy for you. What you're saying to me right now, is that scientific explanation?
Say again?
Is that scientific explanation what you're telling me right now?
Yes.
Okay. Science is a method which we human beings use.
Yes.
That method, here's the method, it has some assumptions.
Yes.
Before you accept these assumptions, you can't use this method.
Yes.
Right? One of the assumptions, as we've agreed, that you use is that we are rational beings that have truth-bearing faculties.
Yes.
Now, you assume this to be true before you use the scientific method. Then why are you trying to use a scientific explanation to justify the assumption of science? You don't understand. It's a very simple point I make.
Because...
Your argument.
Let me just finish it. I'll talk to you in a second, but let's just, because it gets messy otherwise. So do you see the point I'm making?
I assume certain things in this world in order for us to exist.
Okay,
there are basic assumptions which I've given you.
Yeah, and human
from that we can build.
Okay. Now my question is simple. Your worldview, what explanation, or how do you account for this assumption that you have, which is human rationality?
You can keep asking the question in 15 different ways. I'm going to keep giving you the same answer.
Because the reality is you don't have an answer.
I've given you my answer.
No, you don't. You admitted it earlier, you don't have an answer. You said, so what if I don't have an answer?
I said, let's suppose that we didn't. But I'm not saying that.
Well, if we've supported, no, but that's what... You're not giving me an answer after understanding what I'm saying. Well, it shows me that you don't have an answer. That's what it shows me.
Okay, if you want to assume that, that's fine. I've answered you about 3 times.
I'm assuming that.
Have you not heard it?
No, you haven't.
Have you been standing here the whole time?
I've heard. It's been recorded in your camera. I'm sure your users will see this. It's been recorded here. I've told you 10 times probably why what you're doing is almost like a dog chasing his own tail. right? Because you're using an assumption of science which you accept to be true to do science,
Yes.
and then you're using a scientific explanation to justify that very assumption. It's circular. It's ridiculously circular.
If you think so.
But so, that being the case, on your worldview,
Correct.
on your worldview, atheism and naturalism, how do you account for human rationality? And I'll keep asking you that question.
And
Because
I'll keep responding the
Well,
same. From a naturalistic point of view, and the moment I speak to you, you are claiming I'm using science.
well, no, you yourself.
When I open my mouth, I'm using science in your view.
You yourself have told me that what you're saying.
You're asking for an explanation,
Well, obviously you don't have an explanation.
and I'm giving you one,
No.
and you are claiming that it's a scientific
Well,
explanation.
yes, and you admit that.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So what's the you if you admit that what I'm saying is the case, then why are you?
So I'm using a scientific, and you are presupposing that God exists and did it for you.
Let's move on to the scientific
Yes,
point because
let's
we're not getting
move on.
anywhere.
No.
You obviously don't have an explanation.
I've told you mine.
From a worldview
It's not
perspective.
acceptable to you. You've given me yours, which you've presupposed. So
Everyone can see the point I was making. You obviously didn't
Okay.
understand that point. But that being the case, obviously now, I'm going to assume this because you haven't given me an answer. According to your worldview, you don't have an answer to human rationality of truth-bearing faculties. Anyway, let's address your scientific contention. So you're saying that we develop rational faculties according to what science tells us today, so we can reason better and survive. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Well, that understanding is not held even by atheist scientists that study human cognition and rationality. There's several problems. You can study Thomas Nagel, who's an open atheist. He's written a book called Mind and Cosmos. There's another interesting book written by.
all right. So what? Let me ask
I'm
you
just
the
going to give you the
question.
answer. Yeah, I'm going to tell
go
you
ahead.
why what you've assumed is incorrect, according to scientists, atheist scientists as well. There's another book published by Oxford Press called Beyond Evolution, right? Anthony O'Hare's Oxford Press published publication, and what he basically says, in not too many words, is that human rationality, truth-bearing faculties are not necessary for survival. Many examples you can give, which this shows that this is the case, and if this is the case, then there's no need to, or there's no reason for truth-bearing faculties to develop. I'll give you a simple analogy, just to put things in perspective.
I don't necessarily agree with
Anthony
that.
O'Hare gives the analogy. You can tell me why you disagree. You may find an individual who avoids eating all mushrooms, the food itself, right? Or fungi, whatever the correct word is you use. He avoids all mushrooms and he survives, and he's fine, right? But we know that's a false belief, it's a false understanding, because there's some mushrooms which are completely edible, and if you were to eat those mushrooms, you will survive, right? So it's a simple example of where a false or misunderstanding of a belief or a false belief results in survival, right? Also, interestingly, it's a very detailed point, but the book Beyond Evolution makes a very interesting point. He says, evolution is concerned with the most simple process you can implement as a faculty which would lead to a certain outcome, which is survival, right? Now, when it comes to survival, understanding the world around us or a situation, take a predator in a survival situation or an animal in a survival situation. Now, for him to calculate his environment, his surroundings and the situation and the nature and truth of the situation will take too long. It's a very complicated process. Instead, what's a more of an easier, viable option is for a organism to basically be given a cue or a signal or some sort of color. Maybe that may be seeing a color, it may be seeing some sort of flash or some sort of signaling which will allow him to react and to run away or survive. So that clearly demonstrates that truth-bearing faculties are not necessary from a survival perspective. False beliefs are completely adequate in resulting in survival. According to
Sometimes, not all the time, isn't it?
of course, but this is the point. If sometimes false beliefs can result in survival, sometimes true beliefs can, then there's no need for a faculty which has truth-bearing, which is purely concerned with truth, to develop from an evolutionary perspective. Because that's not concerned with truth, it's concerned with survival. It's two different things.
Yeah, but over time, what we call evolution, so let's say the last 1,000 years, not the last million, let's say, we've come to understand truth, correct?
No.
Or a method to ascertain truth.
No. Having a method is one thing. Knowing that we have the ability to do so is another thing. That's why I was asking you from a foundational perspective earlier, because you can't conflate these points with what we're talking about right now, right? Because now we're going to talk about very wishy-washy type of assumptions which scientists can make, or based on what they've studied we can make, right? This is not the truth. From what we see, false and true beliefs can both result in adequate survival. If this is the case, there's no need for truth-bearing faculties to develop. There's no explanation for them from an evolutionary perspective.
I don't necessarily agree. I need to do more research, but just off the top of my head, that doesn't
have a read of the book by Anthony O'Hare.
Anthony
O'Hare, Beyond Evolution, published by Oxford Press. Very interesting read. Also by Thomas Nagel, Mind and Cosmos. And he covered in this. Thomas Nagel himself is an atheist, so he's not a theist or a believer.
So what is their view on it then?
Well, like I've just suggested.
Do they suggest that it came from a religious point of view?
Thomas Nagel, for example, he argues that a purely naturalistic evolutionary account for human rationality and consciousness is not good enough. He says as atheist scientists, we have to come up with something better, otherwise we're going to run into huge problems as we're seeing today. We're running into huge problems from a naturalistic perspective. But from a theistic Islamic perspective, like I gave you, the answers in a nutshell within 2 sentences, I can give you the answer. So purely based on this, Roger, you said, right? Rob, purely based on this, I will encourage you and ask you to look into the Islamic tradition.
I've looked
because
into it,
and I'm still looking into it.
And I don't find it convincing in any way so far.
I'll give you one aspect you could look into it as well, because many detailed analogies and examples specifically relating to human rationality and cognition as given in the Quran. It would be very interesting for you to study.
Yes, so you're presupposing that the only way that we can have this is through a divine creator.
No, not necessarily. What I'm saying is that it best accounts for it. The Islamic explanation best accounts. It gives you the how and the why. I know you're trying to force feed me that the presuppositional argument that I'm doing that, but I made it very clear. A presupposition.
I didn't say that.
No, but you did say that earlier.
I said it originally. Yes.
You said I'm trying to smuggle.
I have seen you do that.
You said now I'm trying to smuggle. No, you said now I'm trying to smuggle it in. It's on camera.
Right.
You said that, right?
Yes.
But I'm not, and I made it very clear. I'm not because 2 reasons. One main reason being a presuppositional argument assumes the guy that's making the argument that the individual you're speaking to cannot account for his rationality until he justifies or accounts for it. Right? I'm not doing that. I'm saying you are rational. I'm rational. We are this way.
You're asking me if I can account for it, correct?
On your worldview.
Yes. And you are saying that I can't.
No, you haven't.
And you are saying to me you can.
I have.
You assume. And I'm saying that you have just defined that as your answer.
No. According to my worldview.
Yes.
Assuming it to be true, it's a perfectly coherent answer.
Correct, but that's you've hit the crux of it, assuming it to be
true.
No,
but that's a different discussion. We can have that as well. But right now I'm talking to you about something very specific, which is human cognition and rationality. And the reason I speak to atheists about rationality is because many atheists discuss with Muslims about God, God's existence.
Yes,
we're very
correct.
And I'm not going to pre-frame you. I'm just saying some atheists say we're very rational. We live in the 21st century. We have science. We can think. You guys are backwards and have backward ideas.
I'm not saying anybody would say that necessarily.
But there's individuals that do, such as Richard Dawkins, who publicly make such statements, right? But anyway, the point being this: atheists have this, generally speaking, the new atheists have this demeanor, this approach. And what I like to do is show, hold on a second, you're claiming rationality, but on your worldview, you can't even account for it. You have no claim to it, right? So you need to assume God before you have this whole type of discourse. And when I say assume God, it's because you haven't given me anything as far as an explanation.
Well, I've given you what I think is an explanation. You don't accept it. So I will go and look this up. Are you here again?
Yes, but for one last time, I'd like to point out you have given me an explanation. Rob has given me an explanation, but the explanation you gave me was a scientific explanation, right? And you agreed to this. It was a scientific explanation. Yes?
If you want to use that word, sure.
Well, it is an empirical explanation, it's a scientific explanation, right? There's no other, because you do science and then you come to these conclusions, these explanations. But that being the case, what you've done is you've used an assumption of science to assume science, do the science, and then try to justify the assumption using science. It's circular. It's like I said once again, it's like a dog chasing its own tail.
I don't agree that it's circular.
But yeah, have a look into it.
Yeah.
Nice speaking to you.
Sorry, you too.
Thanks.
Okay, buddy.
Thank you. Cheers, man.